The little black girl hid near the cargo ramp, asking the biker why her mom didn't return after last night. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. A little black girl, no older than 8, was crouching behind a rusty cargo ramp near the back of a small, aging warehouse on the outskirts of town. She was shaking, not from the cold, but from something far worse. Her clothes were torn and dirty, her knees scraped from running across the rough ground. Her small hands were pressed tightly against her face as she struggled to hold back the tears, afraid of what might happen next. The girl was alone, no sign of her mother, and no one in sight who could help. The only sound was the distant hum of trucks idling and the occasional gust of wind that blew dust through the empty lot. She had been waiting for what felt like forever. The last time she saw her mother was the night before, when everything seemed fine. But something changed overnight, and now her world felt like it was crumbling. Her mother, who had always promised to protect her, was gone. In her heart, the girl knew something terrible had happened. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, trying to clear her vision. It was then she noticed a figure moving in the distance. Her heart skipped a beat. A biker. She had heard about them, but she had never seen one up close. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, and his leather jacket gleamed in the afternoon sun. The rumbling sound of his motorcycle was like thunder, and the vibrations made the girl's heart race. She knew this was her chance. Gathering every ounce of courage, she stood up and ran toward him, her bare feet leaving a trail of dust behind. When she reached him, she grabbed his jacket with both hands, looking up into his face with wide, desperate eyes. "Please help me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "My mom, she didn't come back last night." The biker stopped, his expression softening. He knelt down to her level, eyes scanning her, then the area around them. "Where's your mom, little one?" he asked gently. The girl hesitated, then pointed towards the parking lot where her mother's car was parked earlier. She was here last night, but now she's gone." The biker's eyes narrowed as he looked back at her. The fear in her voice was enough to tell him this was no ordinary situation. Without thinking twice, he pulled out his phone and made a quick call. "We need to find out what's going on here. No one should be left alone like this." As the call ended, he looked at her with a promise in his eyes. "Don't worry, little one. We're going to find her." But the truth was, he had no idea what he was about to walk into. The girl had been running from something far darker than she realized. And the biker, along with his crew, was about to face a nightmare that would change everything they thought they knew about loyalty and family. The biker, still kneeling down, gently wiped the dust off the girl's tear-streaked face. He could feel the weight of her fear, the palpable tension in the air. His instincts told him that something was terribly wrong, and he wasn't going to let this child face whatever nightmare lay ahead alone. He stood up, his leather jacket creaking as he made a quick decision. Without a word, he placed a hand on her shoulder, a silent promise of safety. "Come with me," he said in a low voice. "We'll figure this out together." He led her away from the cargo ramp, where the dim light of the setting sun cast long shadows across the empty lot. As they walked toward his motorcycle, the girl hesitated, glancing back one last time at the spot where she had last seen her mother. "Do you think she's okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The biker paused for a moment, his hand on the bike, and turned to her. His eyes softened. "We're going to do everything we can to find out." He could see the worry in her eyes, the uncertainty that had gripped her heart, and it was a pain. He understood all too well. He didn't know what had happened to her mother, but he would not let this child face it alone. He strapped her helmet onto her head, then carefully helped her onto the back of his motorcycle. As he revved the engine, the rumble of the bike seemed to drown out the silence between them. He felt a surge of determination. Whoever had taken her mother would soon know that they had made a grave mistake. The biker signaled to his crew, and in moments, The convoy of motorcycles roared to life, engines echoing across the empty street. With the girl holding tightly onto him, they sped off into the night, the cool wind rushing past them as they made their way through the streets. The biker's mind was racing, trying to piece together what he knew. The girl's mother had vanished after last night. The girl had no idea why or how. She only knew that her mother hadn't come back, and now she was lost in the dark, looking for someone, anyone, to help her. As they rode through the town, the biker's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a phone buzzing in his pocket. He pulled it out, glancing at the screen. It was a message from one of his crew members, Bear. "We found something. It's not good." The message was short, but enough to make his blood run cold. The girl's mother had been involved with some dangerous people, and the biker knew that this wasn't just about a missing person. It was about something far darker, something that could get them all killed if they weren't careful. The biker quickly replied, "Keep me posted. We're on our way." The urgency in his reply was clear, but the girl, still holding on to him, seemed oblivious to the danger that was closing in. She asked again, her voice tinged with hope, "Do you think we'll find her?" The biker's grip tightened on the handlebars as he steered through the night. He didn't answer immediately. What could he say? He wasn't sure. But what he did know was that he couldn't let her down. He had promised her father, a promise that had been made years ago, that he would look after her. That promise was more than just words. It was a bond forged in blood, and he wasn't about to break it. They continued their ride through the night, the city lights slowly fading into the distance as they headed into more rural areas. The sound of their bikes echoed in the empty streets, filling the silence with the promise of retribution. The girl was quiet now, lost in her thoughts. The biker could tell she was exhausted, but there was no stopping. They had to keep going, no matter what. The sun was beginning to rise by the time they reached a small town on the outskirts, a place the biker recognized well. This was where things would get dangerous. His crew had tracked down information, and now they were ready to confront whatever lay ahead. But there was something else, something the girl didn't know. The people who had taken her mother had connections that ran deep. And the biker and his crew were about to walk straight into the lion's den. The convoy of bikes pulled into a quiet street near the edge of town, where the scent of the morning dew hung in the air. They stopped in front of an old, abandoned building. The biker glanced back at the girl, who was still clinging to him. She looked up, confusion and fear still clouding her eyes. "What is this place?" she asked. The biker hesitated for a moment, his eyes scanning the building. "This is where we start," he said, his voice steady, but there was a flicker of something else in his eyes. A hint of doubt? Or was it resolve? The girl didn't know, but she trusted him. "Stay close," the biker warned, motioning for his crew to get into position. They were about to uncover the truth. But the closer they got to the building, the more the biker realized that this would be no simple rescue mission. It was going to be a fight that would test everything he believed in. And when the doors creaked open, revealing what lay inside, the biker knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The biker and his crew gathered around the building, their engines quiet for the moment as the sun began to rise higher in the sky. The girl, still clutching onto the biker's jacket, stood at his side, her small frame shaking but determined. This was it. They had found the place. The biker looked at his crew, his eyes scanning each of them as they adjusted their gear, preparing for what was to come. They had been through a lot together, fights, close calls, and the kind of battles that left scars. But this was different. This wasn't just about protecting a stranger. This was personal. The girl's eyes were wide with fear, but she was also looking at the bikers like they were her only hope. She trusted them, and in that moment, the biker knew that he couldn't let her down. He had promised her father, a man who had once been a part of this brotherhood, that he would watch over his daughter. And now, it was time to make sure that promise meant something. He turned to his crew and gave him the signal. They moved in formation, all business, with the precision that only a group of people who had lived and died together could achieve. The biker led the way, his boots echoing on the cracked concrete as they moved toward the building. The girl stayed close to him, her steps hesitant, but her resolve clear. Inside the building, everything was eerily quiet. The only sounds are their footsteps and the distant hum of traffic. The place smelled musty, like it hadn't been used in years. The windows were covered in grime, and the air was thick with dust. The door creaked as they pushed it open, the sound like a warning bell. The biker's heart raced. This was where they would find the answers. This was where the girl's mother was. As they stepped inside, the dim light revealed a large, open space filled with old, broken furniture. The walls were stained, and the floor was covered in dirt and debris. The smell of mildew lingered in the air. But there was something else, something darker. The biker's hand instinctively went to his gun, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of movement. The girl, who had been walking quietly beside him, suddenly tugged on his sleeve. "I think she's here," she whispered, her voice trembling. The biker nodded, signaling to his crew to spread out and search the area. They moved quickly, covering every corner of the building, their eyes sharp, their ears alert. The biker didn't say a word, but his mind was racing. If the girl's mother was here, then that meant they were getting closer to the truth. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized how dangerous this was. The people they were dealing with were not just criminals. They were dangerous, well-organized, and had power. The biker knew that the situation could turn deadly in an instant. As they made their way through the building, they found no signs of life. The silence was deafening. But then, the girl's voice broke through the stillness. "Mom!" She was standing by a door at the far end of the room, her eyes wide with fear. The biker's heart sank as he saw the look on her face. He immediately motioned for his crew to follow him, moving quickly toward the door. The girl reached for the handle, but the biker stopped her. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice low and steady. The girl nodded, her fear evident, but she trusted him. With a swift motion, the biker pushed open the door. The room beyond was small and dimly lit, with a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. The air was thick and musty. And then, he saw her, lying on the floor, her body limp and pale. The biker rushed forward, kneeling beside her. The girl's mother was unconscious, her breathing shallow. Her face was bruised, and there were signs of abuse all over her body. The biker's jaw tightened in anger. "We need to get her out of here now," he said, his voice cold and commanding. He turned to his crew. "We don't have much time." His crew quickly sprang into action, setting up a perimeter around the building and making sure they were secure. The biker checked the woman's pulse again. She was alive, but barely. He knew they had to get her to a hospital, and fast. The girl stood behind him, her eyes wide with worry. "Is she going to be okay?" she asked, her voice shaking. The biker looked up at her, his face softening. "We're going to make sure she's okay," he promised, though he wasn't sure how true that was. They had to move quickly. They had to get out of here before anyone showed up. The biker's hand reached out to gently lift the girl's mother into his arms. "Let's go," he said, standing up. They made their way back to the door, the weight of the woman's body heavy in his arms. Outside, the convoy of bikes was ready. The engines roared to life as they prepared to leave the building behind them. The biker's mind raced as they sped off into the night. There was no time to rest, no time to let their guard down. The people who had done this were still out there, and the biker knew they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. But the biker wasn't about to let that happen. He had made a promise, and he wasn't going to break it. The convoy of motorcycles sped through the quiet streets, the roar of the engines drowning out everything else. The biker held the girl's mother in his arms, her limp body resting against his chest as they made their way toward the hospital. His mind was racing, trying to calculate how long it would take to get her the medical attention she desperately needed. The girl sat behind him, her hands gripping him tightly, her small frame still trembling with fear. The silence between them was heavy, filled with the weight of everything they had just discovered. The biker's thoughts kept drifting back to the moments they had spent in that abandoned building. The mother's bruised and battered body, the fear in the girl's eyes, the anger that had built up inside him when he saw what had been done to her. As they neared the hospital, the biker's grip tightened on the handlebars. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. He glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see a car tailing them, but saw nothing. Still, the nagging sense of danger refused to leave him. They needed to get to the hospital, get the girl's mother the help she needed, and then figure out what came next. The bikers were no strangers to danger, but this felt different. This wasn't just about a fight. It was about something deeper, something personal. They had no idea who they were dealing with, but they knew this was just the beginning. As they pulled into the hospital parking lot, the biker's heart sank. The place was eerily quiet, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The crew immediately went into action. Bear, Diesel, and the others spread out, keeping an eye on their surroundings, making sure they weren't walking into a trap. The biker carefully lifted the woman from his arms and carried her inside, the cold hospital air hitting him like a wave. The staff was quick to react, immediately taking over and rushing the woman to the emergency room. The girl, still holding on to the biker's jacket, stood in the doorway, watching as her mother was whisked away. Her face was pale, her hands shaking. The biker knelt down in front of her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "She's in good hands now," he said, his voice calm, trying to reassure her. The girl looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears. "Do you think she's going to be okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The biker hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "We're going to make sure she is." He stood up and motioned for the rest of the crew to follow him. They had no time to waste. They needed answers, and they needed them now. The girl's mother had been through hell, and the biker knew that they couldn't stop until they figured out who was responsible. As they gathered in the waiting area, the biker looked around, his mind still racing. He had to call in reinforcements, get more eyes on the situation. They were dealing with something bigger than they had anticipated. The girl's mother had been targeted, and the biker could feel the danger closing in. He pulled out his phone, dialing a number. "It's time to move," he said when the line clicked open. "We need to get a team to cover all exits and get someone on the phone with a contact at the hospital. I want to know everything about the woman's condition." He hung up and turned to face his crew. "We stay sharp. No one leaves until we have answers." Bear, Diesel, and the rest of the crew nodded in agreement. They knew the stakes were high, and they weren't going to let anything stop them. The biker looked down at the girl, who was still standing quietly in the corner, her eyes wide with fear. He knew that, no matter what happened next, they couldn't afford to fail her. He walked over to her, crouching down to meet her gaze. "You did the right thing," he said softly. "We're going to get your mom the help she needs, and we'll make sure you're safe." The girl nodded, her lips trembling. "Thank you," she whispered. The biker stood up, his face hardening with resolve. "This is just the beginning. We're not leaving until we find out who did this to your mom, and we'll make sure they pay for it." The crew gathered around him, ready for whatever was next. They had no idea how deep this went, but one thing was clear: no one messed with their family and got away with it. The biker took a deep breath and turned back toward the emergency room. The battle wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The biker stood in the hospital waiting room, his eyes focused on the door to the emergency room, where the girl's mother had been rushed in. The team had secured the area, making sure no one could get in or out unnoticed, but the biker could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The girl, who had been standing silently by his side, was now sitting on a chair, her small body curled up into a tight ball. Her hands were clenched in her lap, her head lowered, as if trying to escape the overwhelming fear that had taken over her. He could see how terrified she was, and despite the calm exterior he was trying to maintain, he felt the same fear creeping in. What if they couldn't save her mother? What if the people responsible came for them next? His phone buzzed in his pocket, snapping him out of his thoughts. He pulled it out quickly, glancing at the screen. It was a message from his contact at the hospital. The woman's condition was stable for now, but they hadn't been able to stabilize her completely. The damage was extensive. The biker cursed under his breath, the weight of the situation becoming more real with each passing second. "We need to get answers," he muttered, pacing back and forth. His crew had been working their connections all night, trying to gather information about who could be behind this, but so far, it was like hitting a brick wall. "What do we know?" Bear asked, approaching him. The biker shook his head, frustration clear in his features. "Not much. Just that her ex-husband, the girl's father, was mixed up in some shady stuff. He got out, but there's more going on here. Something doesn't add up." Bear nodded, his eyes sharp, sensing the tension in the air. "We'll keep pushing, but we need to be careful. Whoever did this is connected, and they're not going to take kindly to us poking around." The biker clenched his fists, the anger inside him building. "They took her mother. If they think we're going to back down, they're dead wrong." Just then, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hall, and the door to the emergency room opened. A doctor stepped out, her face grim. The biker immediately approached her, his heart racing. "How is she?" he asked, his voice low but urgent. The doctor looked at him, her expression tired but professional. "She's stable for now, but she's been through a lot. We've got her hooked up to 4 fluids and painkillers, but she needs more. Her injuries suggest months, maybe even years of abuse. Whoever did this to her was meticulous." The biker felt his blood run cold. "Her ex?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The doctor hesitated, then nodded. "That's what we think. But there's something else. She's been exposed to something worse, something darker." The biker's fists tightened at his sides. "What do you mean?" The doctor glanced around the room, making sure no one was listening. "There are signs of trauma that don't match any physical injuries. Something more psychological, something twisted." The biker's heart sank. "So, she's been living in hell." The doctor nodded. "She's been controlled, manipulated. We see it all the time, but it's always the same. They keep the victim close, make them feel helpless, make them believe they deserve the pain." The biker's jaw tightened. "We need to find out everything we can about her life, her relationships. There has to be a connection between her and the people who did this." The doctor gave a small, reluctant nod. "I'll try to get you more information, but I have to warn you. This is going to get ugly. If you push too hard, you might end up bringing more harm to her than good." The biker stared at her, his mind racing. He couldn't stop now. The girl needed her mother. He needed to find out who had done this, and he would stop at nothing to make sure they paid for what they had done. As the doctor walked away, the biker turned to his crew. "We have work to do. Keep digging. Find out everything you can about the ex-husband, his friends, his connections. We need answers, and we need them fast." The crew nodded, each of them knowing the danger they were about to step into. The biker turned to the girl, who was still sitting quietly in the corner, her eyes fixed on the floor. He walked over to her and crouched down, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "Your mom is going to be okay. We're going to make sure of it." She looked up at him, her eyes full of doubt and fear. "Do you promise?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The biker looked her in the eyes, his voice soft but firm. "I promise." He stood up and turned back toward his crew. The fight was far from over, and the deeper they went, the more dangerous it would get. But he wasn't going to stop. Not until he had found the people responsible for hurting this family. He wasn't just doing this for the girl. He was doing it for every victim out there who couldn't fight for themselves. And he would make sure those who had caused this pain would face justice, no matter what it took. The hospital was buzzing with activity, but inside the waiting room, everything felt still, as if time had slowed down. The girl sat quietly, her eyes fixed on the floor, her small hands clutched tightly together. The biker stood nearby, his posture tense, his mind racing with questions. He had promised the girl that everything would be okay, but with each passing minute, the weight of that promise grew heavier. He couldn't help but feel like the walls were closing in. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out quickly, seeing a message from Bear. "We found something. It's bad." The biker's heart sank as he read the message. It wasn't just her mother they were dealing with. The situation was far worse than he had anticipated. He quickly responded, "Tell me everything." As the biker waited for Bear's reply, he turned his attention to the girl. She hadn't spoken much since they arrived at the hospital. The fear was still in her eyes, and it was clear that the night had taken its toll on her. He crouched down in front of her, his voice low and calm. "Hey, kid. You. Okay." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "I miss my mom," she whispered. The biker's heart ached as he reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "She's strong, and we're doing everything we can to get her back on her feet." The girl nodded, but the doubt in her eyes was undeniable. The biker didn't know what else to say. He had no idea how long it would take for her mother to recover, or if she even would. But one thing was clear. He wasn't going to stop until the people responsible paid for what they had done. Just then, Bear's response came through. We got a name. Patrick Donovan. The biker's mind raced as he read the message. Patrick Donovan was the girl's stepfather, the man who had brought her mother to the hospital, claiming she had fallen. The biker's gut twisted with anger. The more he thought about it, the more it seemed like Donovan was hiding something. "Give me everything on him," the biker typed back. He stood up and turned to his crew, his voice steady but filled with determination. "We have a name. Donovan. We need to find out everything about him, his history, his connections, and anything that can help us bring him down." The crew nodded in unison. They had been through countless battles together, but this felt different. This wasn't just about fighting for the girl's mother. This was about standing up for what was right, even when it seemed impossible. The biker glanced back at the girl, who was still sitting in the corner, her face pale and tired. "We're going to make this right," he promised, his voice firm. He wasn't going to let her down. Not now, not ever. The crew dispersed to gather information, each member working their contacts and digging into Donovan's past. The biker stepped outside for a moment, needing a break from the tension inside. He walked out into the cool night air, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He lit a cigarette, the glow of the lighter briefly illuminating his face. His thoughts were racing, but all he could think about was the girl. She was so young, so innocent, and yet she had already been through so much. The biker knew the road ahead would be dangerous, but he was ready for whatever came next. His phone buzzed again. It was Bear. "We've got a location. Donovan's at a bar on the edge of town." The biker's heart began to race. "Get everyone together. We're going after him." He tossed the cigarette to the ground and crushed it under his boot. He wasn't wasting any more time. They were going to get answers. They were going to make sure that Donovan didn't hurt anyone else. As the biker made his way back into the hospital, his crew was already gathered, ready to move. "Let's go," he said, his voice steady. They didn't speak much as they walked out to the bikes, the urgency in the air palpable. The convoy roared to life as they sped through the quiet streets, heading toward the bar on the edge of town. The biker's mind was focused. They were getting closer. They were closing in on the man who had caused so much pain. The streets blurred past them as they made their way to the bar. The biker could feel the tension building, the anticipation of the confrontation ahead. When they arrived, they parked their bikes in a secluded spot behind the building. The biker signaled for his crew to stay low and move quietly. They approached the bar from the back, their footsteps soft on the ground. The biker's heart was pounding in his chest as he neared the door. He didn't know what to expect, but he was ready for anything. He pushed the door open, the creak of the hinges almost too loud in the silence. Inside, the bar was dimly lit, the air thick with smoke and the smell of alcohol. The biker's eyes immediately locked on Donovan, who was sitting at the bar, his back turned. The biker's blood boiled as he approached. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. The moment he would make sure Donovan paid for what he had done. He wasn't just going to stand by and let this man walk free. The biker tapped Donovan on the shoulder, and when he turned around, he saw the anger in the biker's eyes. "You've been running long enough," the biker growled. Donovan's face went pale as he realized who he was facing. The biker was ready for the truth, and he wasn't going to stop until he had it. The biker's hand gripped the doorframe as he stood face to face with Patrick Donovan. The man's pale face had drained of color, his eyes wide with fear as he looked up at the biker. The air in the room felt thick with tension, as if everything had been building to this moment. The biker could see the recognition in Donovan's eyes, the realization that he was no longer in control of the situation. "What do you want?" Donovan's voice was shaky, trying to remain steady, but failing. The biker didn't flinch. His eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched tight. "You know exactly what I want." He stepped forward, forcing Donovan to back up against the bar, the rest of the bikers moving in behind him, creating a circle that trapped Donovan in place. The room seemed to grow smaller with each passing second, the biker's presence pressing in on him. Donovan glanced around the room, desperate, but no one else was there to help. It was just him, the biker, and the crew. "You think you could just come in here and threaten me?" Donovan stammered, his voice trying to regain some bravado. The biker's hand tightened around the bar, the grip on his anger steady and unyielding. "You're the one who's been threatening people," the biker growled. What you've done to that girl, what you've done to her mother, it ends tonight. Donovan's eyes flickered with panic. He opened his mouth to speak, but the biker cut him off. You think you can get away with abusing them? No, we're not walking away until you tell us everything. Who did this? Who else is involved? The biker's voice was low but forceful. Donovan seemed to hesitate for a moment, his face shifting between guilt and anger. Finally, he spoke, his words coming out in a low, defiant tone. You don't know what you're dealing with. I'm not the one you should be after. There are people above me, people you can't even touch. The biker stepped closer, his eyes burning with intensity. I don't care who you think is above you. I'm here for you. Now, you're going to tell me who's really behind this, or you're going to regret it. The room fell silent except for the sound of heavy breathing. Donovan looked at the biker, his eyes darting to the door, but the bikers had already blocked the exits. He knew there was no way out. You think I'm scared of you? Donovan sneered, tried to regain some control, but his voice was betraying him. The biker's fist slammed into the bar with a force that made the entire room shake. You should be, he said through gritted teeth. You've hurt enough people. You've hurt that girl, and you've hurt her mother. This ends now. Donovan recoiled slightly at the force in the biker's voice, the venom behind every word. His expression faltered as he realized the biker wasn't bluffing. For the first time, there was fear in his eyes. The biker knew they had him cornered. Tell me everything, the biker demanded again, his voice calm but unyielding. Donovan's shoulders slumped as the tension in his body broke. He glanced at the bikers, then back at the biker standing before him, and then let out a long, shaky breath. It wasn't supposed to go this far, he muttered. I was just following orders. There are people I owe money to, people who won't stop until I do what they say. If I didn't, who? The biker interrupted, his voice rising with urgency. Donovan hesitated, his eyes shifting around, but then he finally spoke, his voice low. The Serpents. They have ties to everything, drugs, loans, people. They told me to get her out of the picture. They told me she was a problem, but I didn't know they'd hurt her like this. The biker's heart raced as he processed the information. The Serpents, the same name that had come up in their investigation. A notorious gang, feared for their brutality and ruthless tactics. And now, they were behind everything. You're telling me the Serpents are behind this? The biker asked, his voice cold with disbelief. Donovan nodded. Yeah, they didn't want her talking. They thought she knew too much. And when she didn't cooperate, his voice trailed off, but the biker didn't need him to finish. The truth was clear. The Serpents were involved, and they had just escalated things to an unimaginable level. Where are they? The biker demanded. Where can we find them? Donovan hesitated, clearly weighing his options. His fear of the Serpents was palpable, but the fear of what the bikers would do to him now was worse. I can't tell you that, he said, shaking his head. They'll kill me if I do. The biker stepped closer, his eyes locking onto Donovan's. You have a choice, he said softly. Help us take them down, and you walk out of here. Stay silent, and you don't leave this place alive. Donovan swallowed hard, his fear rising once again. He looked around, his eyes wide with desperation. They'll be watching. They'll know if I say anything. The biker's gaze never wavered. We're not asking for your life. We're asking you to do the right thing. Help us stop them. The silence stretched out between them, but in that moment, Donovan seemed to come to a decision. He nodded, his shoulders slumping in defeat. They meet at the old warehouse on 3rd and Oak. You'll find them there. But be careful. They're armed, and they don't hesitate. The biker gave a short nod, signaling to his crew. Get ready. We're going in. With that, the bikers turned and walked toward the door, the weight of the situation settling over them. They were about to take down one of the most dangerous gangs in the city, and they weren't going to stop until they had justice. As the biker led his crew out of the bar, his mind was focused. He wasn't just doing this for the girl's mother anymore. He was doing it for every person who had suffered at the hands of the Serpents. And he wasn't going to stop until they were brought down for good. The biker's eyes were locked on the road ahead, his focus sharp as the convoy of motorcycles rumbled through the dark streets. The cold air whipped past them, but the biker barely noticed. His mind was consumed with the mission. They were headed straight to the old warehouse on 3rd and Oak, the location that Donovan had given them. The air around them felt charged, as if everything was about to change in the next few moments. The girl's mother was still in the hospital, and they had no time to waste. Her life was still hanging in the balance. His promise to her father burned in his chest, and he knew there was no turning back now. The warehouse loomed ahead, an ominous structure standing like a sentinel in the darkness. The bikers signaled for the crew to slow down as they neared the entrance. The last thing they needed was to give away their position. They parked their bikes behind a row of old shipping containers, the heavy engines going silent. The night was eerily still, except for the distant sound of a dog barking somewhere down the street. The biker motioned for everyone to dismount, his mind working through the plan. "We go in fast, no hesitation," he said, his voice low but firm. "We don't know how many are inside, but we know they're armed. Stay sharp." The crew nodded, each of them moving with precision, their experience showing in every motion. They approached the warehouse cautiously, sticking to the shadows, the weight of the night pressing down on them. As they neared the building, the biker's heart started to pound. The adrenaline surged through his veins, the anticipation of the confrontation growing stronger with each step. The crew spread out, taking up positions around the building, preparing for what was to come. The biker reached for the door handle, testing it. It was unlocked. He pushed the door open slowly, his eyes scanning the interior. The warehouse was dimly lit, the faint glow from overhead lights barely cutting through the darkness. The smell of dust and oil filled the air, mixing with something far more sinister. The place was quiet, too quiet. The crew moved in, their boots making soft sounds on the concrete floor. The biker gestured for them to spread out, checking every corner, every shadow. His senses were on high alert. The silence seemed to stretch on forever until the sound of muffled voices broke through. The biker's eyes flicked toward the source of the noise. It was coming from the far side of the warehouse. He motioned for his crew to follow him, and they moved quickly, their footsteps barely audible. As they neared the source of the voices, the biker's stomach churned. He could hear them clearly now. They were talking about the girl's mother. The biker felt his blood begin to boil. He had promised to stop this madness, and now it was time to make sure it ended. He signaled to his crew, and they took their positions, preparing to move in. The biker reached for the door that led into the next room, carefully easing it open. Inside, the Serpents were gathered, several men lounging on old couches, their attention focused on the table in front of them. At the center of the table were piles of money, weapons, and a few briefcases. The biker's breath caught in his throat. These were the men they had been hunting, the men who had caused so much destruction in their wake. The biker's eyes locked onto the leader, a man sitting at the head of the table, his back to them. The man was wearing a leather vest with the Serpents insignia on it. He looked like someone who had been through countless fights, someone who had nothing to lose. The biker knew this was the moment. He motioned to his crew, and they moved in, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The men at the table turned, their eyes wide with surprise. The leader stood up, his hand going to the gun at his side, but before he could reach it, the biker was on him. With a swift motion, the biker knocked the gun from the leader's hand, slamming him against the wall. "This ends tonight," the biker growled, his grip tightening around the man's throat. The leader gasped for air, his eyes wild with fear. "You don't know what you're messing with," he spat. The biker's eyes burned with fury. "I know exactly what I'm messing with, and I'm not leaving until you tell me everything about what happened to that girl's mother." The leader's face twisted into a sneer. "You're too late. She's already paid the price." The biker's hand tightened, and the man gasped again. "Where is she?" the biker demanded. "Tell me." The leader laughed, a cruel sound that echoed through the room. "You think you're going to stop us? We own this town. We own everything." The biker's fury flared. "Not anymore." He slammed the leader into the wall one more time, causing the man to crumple to the ground. "You're done." The other men in the room hesitated, unsure of what to do. The biker's crew stood ready, their eyes locked on the men, waiting for the next move. The biker's focus never wavered. He grabbed the leader by the collar and dragged him to his feet. "You're going to tell me everything," he said, his voice cold and final. The leader glared at him, but there was fear in his eyes now. "You'll never win," he snarled. The biker ignored him, his mind already moving forward. They had the answers now, and the next step was to make sure the Serpents didn't hurt anyone else. The biker nodded to his crew, and they moved into position. The confrontation wasn't over, but it was just beginning. The biker's heart was pounding as he stood over the leader of the Serpents. The man was gasping for air, his eyes wide with fear, but the biker wasn't about to let up. They were close, so close to ending the reign of terror that the Serpents had cast over the city. The biker's crew was spread out, watching the rest of the gang members, making sure no one tried to make a move. The leader had fallen silent after the biker's threat, but the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. The biker tightened his grip on the leader's collar, his voice low and menacing. "You're going to tell me everything, and you're going to tell me now," he said, his words like a promise. The leader's lips trembled, his chest heaving as he fought to regain his composure. His eyes flicked to the other gang members, who stood frozen, not daring to make sound. The biker could sense the fear in the room. They were all realizing the same thing. This was the end for them. The leader finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "You think you could just walk in here and take everything? We're untouchable. You don't know who you're messing with." The biker's jaw clenched, his eyes never leaving the man. "I know exactly who I'm messing with. The Serpents have made their last move." The leader sneered, but the fear was still evident in his eyes. "You'll never stop us. There's too much money, too many people. You're nothing. Just some bikers trying to play hero." The biker's face was inches from the leader's, his voice a quiet growl. "If you were untouchable, you wouldn't be here right now. You wouldn't be begging for your life. Now tell me everything. Who's behind this?" The leader's face twisted into a grimace. For a moment, it seemed like he was going to resist, but the biker's grip tightened, and the man's resolve shattered. "Fine," he muttered. "It's Viper. He's the one who's been pulling the strings. He's the one who ordered her to be taken. We just did what he told us." The biker's mind raced. Viper. He had heard the name before, but now it all made sense. Viper was the one behind the chaos, the one who had orchestrated the whole thing. The biker knew they were getting closer, but this was only the beginning. "Where is he?" the biker demanded. The leader shook his head weakly. "I don't know. He moves around a lot, but he's got a compound up north. That's where he lays low." The biker's heart raced at the mention of the compound. This was the lead they had been waiting for. He nodded to his crew, signaling them to get ready. "We're going to find him, and we're going to bring him down." The leader's eyes widened with terror. "You can't. You'll never get past his guards. They're armed, and they'll kill you before you even get close." The biker stepped back, his hand releasing the leader's collar. "We'll see about that." He turned to his crew, his voice steady but filled with determination. "Get the bikes ready. We're going to take down Viper, once and for all." The crew didn't hesitate. They were already moving, preparing for the next phase of the mission. The biker turned back to the leader, who was still slumped against the wall, breathing heavily. "You've made a deal with the devil, and now you're going to pay for it," the biker said coldly. "But don't worry, you'll be taken care of." He motioned for one of his men to tie up the leader, making sure he wouldn't escape. The biker then headed out the door, his mind focused on the task ahead. They had a compound to raid, and nothing was going to stand in their way. As they rode out into the night, the biker's heart was heavy, but his resolve was stronger than ever. Viper and his Serpents were going down, and they weren't going to stop until they were completely wiped out. The engines roared as they sped through the empty streets, heading north. The tension in the air was palpable, but the biker knew they were getting closer to the end. Every mile brought them closer to the compound, closer to ending the nightmare that had haunted them for so long. The rest of the crew kept pace, their faces hard with determination. They had no fear now. They had come this far, and there was no turning back. The biker glanced back at the girl, who was riding behind him, her eyes wide with uncertainty, but also a spark of hope. She had trusted them, and they weren't going to let her down. The sun was beginning to rise as they approached the compound, the first light of day casting long shadows across the land. The bikers signaled for the crew to slow down. They were getting close. This was it. They were about to face Viper, the man who had caused so much pain and suffering, and they were going to make sure he paid. The biker's heart beat faster as they neared the compound's gates. He could see the armed guards standing at the entrance, their eyes scanning the area for any sign of trouble. But the biker wasn't worried. He had a plan, and it was going to work. With a quick nod, he signaled to his crew. "We move now." They charged forward, the roar of their engines shattering the silence of the morning. The fight for justice had begun. The sound of roaring engines filled the air as the convoy of bikers closed in on the compound. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the ground as they approached the heavily guarded entrance. The biker's grip tightened on the handlebars, his focus sharp. They were moments away from confronting Viper, and everything they had worked for led to this moment. The team was ready. They had trained for this, prepared for the worst, and now they were about to bring an end to the terror the Serpents had unleashed on the city. As they neared the gates, the biker's mind raced with thoughts of the girl and her mother. This was about more than just taking down a gang. This was about ensuring that no one else had to suffer at their hands. The biker glanced over his shoulder to make sure his crew was in position. Bear, Diesel, and the others were spread out, keeping low and moving with the precision of soldiers on a mission. The bikers signaled for them to move forward. The gates were heavily guarded, but the crew had a plan. As they approached the entrance, the biker's heart began to race. The guards at the gate were already on high alert, their eyes scanning the approaching bikes. The biker knew they were about to make their move. They had no time to waste. Without warning, he revved his engine and charged toward the gates. The sound of his motorcycle, followed by the others, was deafening. The guards scrambled into position, pulling out their weapons and shouting at the bikers to stop. But it was too late. The biker's crew was already in motion, racing through the gates with a speed and intensity that left no room for hesitation. The first guard lunged at the biker, but he was quickly knocked aside as the convoy stormed through. The biker's mind was focused, every movement calculated. His eyes locked onto the compound's entrance, where he knew Viper was waiting. They had to get to him fast. The biker's hand gripped his weapon, his heart pounding as they entered the compound. The sound of gunfire rang out from the guards, but the bikers were too quick, too organized. The crew moved with precision, taking down anyone who stood in their way. The biker could see the fear in the eyes of the Serpents as they realized they were outmatched. This was not their fight anymore. The biker and his crew moved deeper into the compound, the tension rising with each passing second. The walls of the building loomed ahead, and the sound of footsteps echoed as they neared the main hall. The biker knew they were getting close. Viper had to be inside. He could feel the heat of the moment building, the adrenaline coursing through his veins. They were about to face the man who had caused so much pain, the man who had orchestrated the destruction of so many lives. But this was their fight now. The biker's eyes narrowed as they reached the door to the main hall. He signaled for his crew to hold position as he approached the entrance. His heart was pounding in his chest, but he couldn't afford to show fear now. This was the moment they had been waiting for. He pushed open the door, his eyes scanning the room. Inside, Viper stood at the far end of the hall, surrounded by his men. He was a tall, imposing figure, wearing the Serpent's insignia with pride. The biker's gaze met his, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Viper's eyes flicked with recognition, and a sinister smile spread across his face. "I knew you'd come," Viper said, his voice cold and mocking. "You think you can stop me? You think you're any match for the Serpents?" The biker stepped forward, his voice low but filled with conviction. "You're done, Viper. Your reign of terror ends now." Viper's smile faltered for just a second, but he quickly recovered, his hand resting on the weapon at his side. "You have no idea what you're up against. The Serpents are everywhere. You can't take us down. We're untouchable." The biker's jaw tightened. Not anymore. Without another word, he lunged at Viper, his fist connecting with the man's jaw. The force of the blow sent Viper stumbling back, but he quickly regained his balance, pulling out his gun. The bikers and the Serpents exchanged gunfire as chaos erupted in the room. The sound of bullets ricocheted off the walls, but the biker and his crew were relentless, pushing forward with everything they had. The fight was intense, but the bikers were winning. Every move they made was calculated, every step bringing them closer to Viper. The biker ducked behind a column, narrowly avoiding a bullet. His eyes locked on Viper, who was still trying to regroup, but it was clear that the tide had turned. The Serpents were losing. Viper's face twisted in anger as he watched his men fall one by one. He raised his gun, aiming at the biker, but before he could pull the trigger, the biker was on him. With a swift motion, the biker knocked the gun from Viper's hand, slamming him into the wall. "This is over," the biker said, his voice cold. Viper gasped, trying to break free, but the biker held him firmly in place. "You're going to pay for everything you've done." Viper's eyes flicked to the door, and for a moment, the biker saw fear in his gaze. "You think you've won?" Viper spat, his voice dripping with venom. "I'm just the beginning." The biker's grip tightened. "Not anymore." With a final push, he slammed Viper against the wall, knocking the wind out of him. The Serpent's reign of terror was finally over. The biker stood over him, breathing heavily, his heart still racing. The fight had been brutal, but it was worth it. The city was safe again. As the crew gathered around, the biker turned to face the girl's mother, who had been brought into the room by the medical team. She was alive, and that was all that mattered. The bikers' promise had been kept. They had brought justice, and the girl could finally breathe, easy, knowing her mother was safe. The warehouse was silent now, the sounds of the gunfire and chaos long gone, replaced by the soft hum of the remaining lights above. The bikers stood around, their faces weary but determined, knowing the fight had been long but necessary. Viper was down, his reign of terror finally brought to an end. The crew had done what they set out to do, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was a sense of peace. The biker stood in the center of the room, his eyes scanning the faces of the men who had fought beside him. Bear, Diesel, and the rest of the crew were exhausted but resolute, their expressions hardened by the battle, but softened by the knowledge that they had done the right thing. The biker's mind briefly drifted to the girl, who had been through so much already. She was safe now. Her mother, although bruised and battered, was alive, and that was what mattered. But the work wasn't done yet. There were still consequences to face, still people who needed to be held accountable. As the biker walked over to the door, he felt the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. This wasn't just about taking down a gang. It was about protecting the innocent, ensuring that justice was served, and making sure that those who had caused so much pain paid for their actions. He stepped outside into the cool night air, taking a deep breath, trying to clear his mind. The rest of the crew followed, their faces lit by the pale light of the moon. They had done it. They had stopped the Serpents, and they had saved the girl's mother. But now, the real work began. The biker turned to his crew. "We'll need to clean this place up," he said. "Make sure no one else is going to pick up where Viper left off." Bear nodded in agreement. "We'll make sure the city knows the Serpents are finished. No one is going to want to take their place after what we've done." The biker glanced at him, then turned his gaze to the rest of the crew. "This wasn't just about vengeance," he said, his voice low but strong. "We're not just fighting to take down people. Like Viper, we're fighting for the people who can't fight for themselves. We're here to make sure no one else has to go through what that girl and her mom did." Diesel, who had been quiet up until now, stepped forward. "You're right. This is bigger than any gang. We've got to stay vigilant." The biker nodded. "Exactly. We can't let our guard down now. But tonight, we've won. And that's something worth celebrating." They all exchanged looks, their eyes filled with the unspoken bond that had been forged through everything they had been through. The bikers had become more than just a group. They were family. And that meant they would always have each other's backs, no matter what. As they prepared to leave the compound, the biker took one last look at the warehouse, knowing that this was the last time they would need to come back. The Serpents were done, and the city was safer because of it. They would ride off into the night, but the impact of what they had done would stay with them forever. The girl's mother was in the hospital, recovering, and her daughter was safe. The biker had kept his promise, and for that, he could rest easy. As they started their engines and rode out into the night, the biker felt a sense of pride mixed with relief. They had done the impossible, and now the road ahead was open to them. They would continue to protect the people who needed them, fighting for justice where it was needed most. The girl's face flashed in his mind. She had been through so much, but now she had a future ahead of her. A future free from the fear that had once gripped her life. And that, more than anything, was what made this mission worth it. As the convoy of bikes sped off into the distance, the biker knew they had made a difference. The battle was over, but the fight for justice would never truly end. The sun was setting as the convoy of motorcycles rolled down the quiet streets, the engines still roaring from the adrenaline-filled ride. The bikers had just finished dismantling the Serpents, bringing the chaos to an end. But even though the fight was over, the weight of everything they had experienced remained with them. The biker at the front of the pack, his eyes scanning the road ahead, couldn't shake the feeling that their work wasn't finished. He'd kept his promise to the girl and her mother, but the truth was there were still so many unanswered questions. As they made their way out of the city, the biker glanced over his shoulder to make sure his crew was still with him. Bear, Diesel, and the rest of the crew rode in formation, their faces hard with the satisfaction of victory, but showing signs of exhaustion. They had just been through hell, but the job had been done, and they were finally heading home. The biker took a deep breath, the cool evening air filling his lungs. It felt like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. The girl's mother was in the hospital, and she was recovering. The girl was safe. For now, that was enough. But in the back of his mind, the biker knew that the road ahead was never really clear. The city was safe for the moment, but that didn't mean the Serpents were the only problem. There would always be more to face, more battles to fight. But tonight they had one. As the convoy pulled into the parking lot of their headquarters, the biker slowed his bike, taking a moment to savor the peace that came with the victory. He parked his motorcycle, taking off his helmet and running a hand through his hair. The rest of the crew followed suit, dismounting their bikes and making their way inside the building. Inside, the mood was quieter than usual. They had accomplished what they set out to do, but there was no celebration, no cheers, just the weight of what they had been through, the toll it had taken on each of them. The biker walked over to the table in the center of the room, where a few beers were waiting. He grabbed one and took a long drink, the cool liquid helping to calm his nerves. He could feel the tension in his body, the exhaustion from the long night. Bear joined him, grabbing a beer as well. "We did it," Bear said quietly, his voice tinged with exhaustion but also satisfaction. "Yeah," the biker replied, leaning back in his chair. "But it doesn't feel like enough." "Not yet." Diesel, who had been sitting quietly nearby, looked up. "What do you mean?" The biker sighed, staring into the distance. "We stopped the Serpents, sure, but this fight isn't over. There will always be someone else. Always another fight. I don't know how much longer we can keep doing this." Bear and Diesel exchanged a glance, but neither spoke. The truth was they all felt it, the weight of the endless battle they fought. It was never just one thing, one fight, one enemy. It was a cycle that never seemed to end. "We do what we can," Diesel finally said, his voice low. "We made a difference, and that's all we can do. We can't save everyone, but we can protect those who need it." The biker nodded slowly. Diesel was right, of course. They couldn't save everyone, but they had done what they could. They had saved the girl and her mother. And that meant something. It meant a lot. The biker stood up, his mind clearing as he finished his beer. "You're right," he said, his voice steady. "We've done what we could. Now we rest. Tomorrow, we figure out what's next. But for tonight, we've earned it." The crew nodded in agreement, the quiet camaraderie between them growing stronger. They didn't need to say much. They all understood the weight of what had been done and the sacrifices that had been made. They were a family now, and that was something worth holding on to. As the night wore on, the biker allowed himself to relax for the first time in what felt like forever. They had faced down the Serpents, taken down Viper, and freed the girl and her mother from the nightmare they had been living. For a brief moment, everything felt right. But deep down, the biker knew that the fight wasn't over. It never really was. The world would keep turning, and new challenges would always come. But for tonight, they had one. And that was enough. As the crew settled in, talking quietly among themselves, the biker stepped outside for a moment of peace. The cool night air felt refreshing against his skin. He looked up at the stars, feeling a sense of quiet resolve. He had kept his promise, and he would continue to protect those who needed it. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for tonight, they had done what they set out to do. They had made a difference, and that was something worth fighting for. The morning sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting a golden light across the quiet city. The biker stood at the edge of the parking lot, staring out at the streets. The weight of the night's battle still lingered in his chest, but there was a sense of calm now, something that had been missing for a long time. He had done what he set out to do. The Serpents were gone, and Viper, their leader, had been brought to justice. The girl was safe, and her mother was on the road to recovery. The biker's phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him from his thoughts. He pulled it out and glanced at the screen. It was a message from Bear. The girl's mother is stable. She woke up, and they're transferring her to a different hospital for treatment. She's going to be okay. The biker let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. That was all he needed to hear. They had won. He looked back at the rest of the crew, who were packing up their bikes and preparing to head out. Diesel, Bear, and the others were tired but standing tall, their expressions filled with satisfaction. They had all been through so much, but now they could finally breathe easy. The biker made his way over to them, a small smile creeping onto his face. "We did it," he said, his voice steady. "We finished what we started." Bear clapped him on the back. "Yeah, we did. And we did it together. We saved that girl and her mother. That's what matters." Diesel nodded in agreement. "We made a difference. That's more than most can say." The biker looked around at his crew, his family. They weren't just a group of bikers. They were something more. They were a brotherhood, bound together by loyalty, trust, and the unshakable belief that they could make a difference in the world. "We've all got our scars," the biker said, his voice quiet but filled with meaning. "But we've also got each other, and that's what keeps us going. That's what makes us strong." He turned to the girl, who was sitting on the steps nearby, her eyes wide with gratitude. She had come a long way from the terrified child who had run to them for help. Now, she was safe, and her future was bright. The biker walked over to her and knelt down, meeting her gaze. "You did the right thing," he said gently. "You didn't give up, and because of that, you're safe. Your mom's going to be okay, and you're going to be okay too." The girl's eyes filled with tears, but this time, they were tears of relief, not fear. She threw her arms around the biker, hugging him tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for saving us." The biker's heart swelled with pride. "You don't have to thank me," he said softly. "You're part of this family now, and we always have each other's backs." The girl smiled, her face finally lighting up with hope. It was a small moment, but in that moment, the biker knew that everything he had done had been worth it. The convoy of bikers mounted their bikes, the engines roaring to life. The sound was deafening, but there was a sense of peace in the air. The battle was over, but the work would never truly be finished. There would always be another fight, another person who needed help, another wrong to be righted. But for now, the city was safe. For now, the girl and her mother were safe. And that was enough. As they rode off into the distance, the biker allowed himself to relax for the first time in what felt like forever. The road ahead was long, but it was full of possibilities. There would be more battles to fight, more lives to protect, but for today, they had won. And that was all that mattered.